Thank you, Yasmin, and good morning, everybody. I'm Richard Arnholt, a partner in the Government Contracts Practice Group at Bass, Sims, and as Yasmin said, I'm joined today by my colleague, Adam Briscoe. We appreciate the opportunity to present to you today and to support the great work of the Maryland Apex Accelerator. For those of you who are not familiar with our firm, Bass is a national law firm with more than 350 attorneys providing service in a number of different areas, including litigation, investigations, complex business transactions, and international regulatory matters. Our Government Contracts Practice Group, which is based in Washington, D.C., provides counseling, litigation, and transactional support for companies that contract with federal, state, and local governments. It was named as a highly regarded practice by Chambers USA in 2023. Our clients range from public and private businesses, from Fortune 500 companies, to small and emerging businesses just entering the government markets in a wide variety of industries, including aerospace, information technology, management consulting, defense, among others. Today, as Yasmin mentioned, we're going to go over foreign ownership, control, and influence, and explain why this is important. And for those companies that are looking at or already have a clearance from the federal government or are supporting classified work, this is a really key topic. First, we're going to go over what exactly a facility security clearance is, or an FCL, if you've ever seen that acronym. We'll talk in some detail about what FOCI is, why it's an important consideration, and when is a U.S. entity considered to be under foreign ownership, control, or influence. There are also potential mitigation measures a company looking to obtain clearance can consider. Those measures, as we'll discuss, are imposed, and the sufficiency of those measures is evaluated by the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency, DCSA. And we're going to talk about some ways to mitigate FOCI risks as well. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Adam to start our discussion about what a facility clearance is. Thanks, Adam.
Great. Thank you, Richard. Hello, everybody. Thanks again for joining us today. As Richard mentioned, my name's Adam Briscoe, and I'm an associate with the Government Contracts Practice Group here at Bass, Sims. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you all today about this important topic that can significantly impact a government contractor and its ongoing contract efforts, or even a contract pipeline. So jumping into this first substantive slide here, FOCI directly impacts a contractor's ability to receive what is called a facility security clearance, or FCL for short. An FCL is at bottom a determination by the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency, DCSA, which oversees the issuance and administration of FCLs. Ultimately, that a contractor is eligible for access to classified information. But the important kind of qualifier here is that an FCL is only granted when it's necessary for performance under classified contracts or subcontractors providing support to a prime contracting classified contract effort. And then in addition, an FCL is a counterpart with personnel security clearances, or PCLs. So a clear determination in whether the an FCL is granted is whether a contractor has FOCI, which could result in classified information being exposed or performance on a classified contract being jeopardized. And similar to information classifications that you may be familiar with, and which we'll review in the next slide, a contractor's FCL classification must line up with the highest level of classified access required for contract performance. And so just to wrap up this slide, essentially an FCL is a security clearance of the business entity itself. Richard, if you could go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So getting back to those levels of classification that I just mentioned, there are 4 main levels of classification. And those are controlled unclassified information, or CUI, confidential information, secret, and top secret. CUI is defined as basically unclassified information that the US government creates or possesses that requires safeguarding or dissemination controls, which limits its distribution to those with a lawful government purpose. And additionally, CUI may not be released to the public absent further review by a controlling procuring agency. And then getting to the next classification, confidential classification is applied to information, the unauthorized disclosure of which would reasonably could be expected to cause damage to the national security. Examples of some kind of just basic examples of classified information could include information that indicates the strength of ground, air, naval forces in the United States and overseas areas. It could also be, for example, the disclosure of technical information used for training or maintenance or inspection of classified munitions. It could also be performance characteristics, test data, design, and other kind of production data on munitions as well. Getting to the next classification is secret, which is used for information, the unauthorized disclosure of which would reasonably could be expected to cause serious damage to the national security. And some examples of secret classified information could include data or information that reveals the strength, identity, composition, or location of military units in a time of war. Or in peacetime, this classification could be used for information pertaining to military units and their related war plans, estimates, deployment locations, which could also involve classified information. The final classification here is top secret, and that is applied to information, the unauthorized disclosure of which could reasonably be expected to cause exceptional grave damage to the national security. And some examples here could be war planning documents, operational plans for single operations or a series of connected operations, intelligence documents that contain completed intelligence as well. Richard, if you could go to the next slide, please.
Sure. Adam, I just wanted to add briefly, you may have heard, or the audience may have heard some other terms related to additional restrictions that apply to certain types of particularly sensitive top secret information. That's SCI, or sensitive compartmented information, or SAP, special access programs. Access to those types of information may require screening, or do require screening above and beyond the process for obtaining a top secret clearance. Things could include, polygraphs and additional background checks and so on.
Thanks. Yeah, so now getting into the FCL application process itself, to be considered for an FCL, a facility must first have an approved sponsorship request from what's called a government contracting activity, or a GCA, or from a cleared prime contractor, which is the prime contractor is sponsoring the facility under the National Industrial Security Program, or NISP for short. And ultimately, there needs to be a valid justification outlining the requirement to access the classified information. Generally, a contractor doesn't need a clearance, though, to bid on or be awarded a government contract. So when going through the FCL process, companies can normally get an interim clearance. And as for the application process itself, first and foremost, a contractor must have an actual need to access the classified information, which is indicated through the completion of a Department of Defense Form 254, or DD 254 for short. the contractor must also identify a facility security officer who processes and maintains the FCL over the course of the contract or the performance at issue. Then a sponsorship package is submitted by either the sponsor government contracting activity or the sponsor industry user, which is evaluated by DCSA to confirm that the contractor has a legitimate need to access the classified information in the contract at issue. And among other things, the sponsorship package will include information related to the company's organizational structure, the contract, the facility security officer, the FCO, a sponsor, and more. Once a sponsorship request is submitted, a DCA reviewer can approve or reject the request, or they could also request additional information from the sponsor or government contracting activity in order to make a final determination. Next, the company submitting the FCL application would name key management personnel, or KMP, and they're required to, the KMP themselves are required to submit personal information and fingerprints to obtain personnel security clearances, if applicable for the contract. Then an initial orientation meeting is scheduled and conducted by an industry security representative, or ISR, that is assigned from the DCSA local field office. And some topics that may be discussed during this initial orientation meeting include the company's NISPOM requirements, the facility security program, the facility's insider threat program, and you may also be needed to submit additional key management personnel U.S. citizenship verification. The key management personnel security clearances are then submitted and processed. And following this, the FOCI review and the implementation of any mitigation measures take place, which will review the submission requirements and mechanics of this in more detail shortly. The DCSA then conducts its processing, and the FCSL is issued, assuming all issues have been, all outstanding issues or identified issues have been remediated. And I'll pass it over to Richard to review the next few slides.
Thanks very much, Adam. This FCL application process can take quite some time, particularly if there are foreign ownership control or influence concerns. We've worked with clients where DCSA has taken upwards of a year, and much of that time had been spent reviewing the mitigation measures that were put in place to ensure that things like foreign investors couldn't obtain classified information. So what exactly is FOCI, or FOCI, as some people pronounce it? It means a situation where the degree of ownership, control, or influence over a contractor by a foreign interest is such that a reasonable basis exists for concluding that classified information may be compromised. The most typical situation, I think, is foreign ownership of an entity, and there are today major defense contractors supporting the U.S. government that are owned by foreign entities, or have foreign ownership or have foreign government involvement. For example, BAE comes to mind. The U.S. government allows and even encourages foreign investment in the U.S. industrial base, but requires that such investments be consistent with U.S. national security interests. Foreign control of companies that are trusted with classified information and are performing classified contracts creates threat vectors that have to be closed or mitigated. In some cases where mitigation isn't possible or companies are unwilling to engage in the type of mitigation required by DCSA, the clearances will just be denied. The National Industrial Security Program Operating Manual, or NISPOM, was an outgrowth of recognition in around 1990 by President H.W. Bush that the government needed to unify its processes and procedures for granting access to classified information by private companies. Up until that point, the process was agency by agency. So if you had a contract with the Department of Defense, they had one process for granting that access and overseeing it. If you needed access to classified information about our nuclear program through the Department of Energy, there was another process. So by executive order, President Bush required the sort of unification of those processes. And the result was the NISPOM. I think it was in 2020, the NISPOM was finally codified, and it now appears in regulation at 32 CFR Part 117. And the NISPOM regulation, as it's now referred to, provides specific requirements, restrictions, and safeguards for industry to prevent unauthorized disclosure of U.S. classified and export-controlled information or technology to foreign interests. Why is this important? Well, I think most of you can think of a number of reasons. Here's just a few. The loss of proprietary information and trade secrets can reduce economic competitiveness. Our enemies, and some cases our allies or our frenemies, have active industrial espionage programs seeking to leverage U.S. ingenuity and R&D for use in their own military and commercial programs. Increased FOCI risk could reduce domestic investor interest in your business. It could also limit government awards and contracts, as national security considerations may impact your eligibility for government funds. And it could render you ineligible for a facility security clearance. Although, as we're going to talk about near the end of the presentation, there are a number of mitigation tools that DCSA uses, some of which are quite severe in the restrictions they place on an owner's ability to have visibility into what the company is doing, that can mitigate those FOCI concerns. But if you are in the government contract space and you are performing classified work, or you think there's a possibility that you're going to, the ownership structure of your company and the investors that you are seeking out to fund your company are important considerations, and you should seek to limit, if at all possible, foreign involvement if you, as I said, if you're planning to do classified work. So the FOCI process entails 4 main steps. First, identification of the foreign ownership, control, or influence. As Adam mentioned, contractors have to complete a standard form or SF-328 and submit that to the government for review. A FOCI issue is identified from the information provided on that form, and contractors need to be open and honest and disclose any relevant information in response to that form. Oftentimes, DCSA comes back and asks for more detail, particularly if your company has a complex structure or, a significant foreign investments or loans from foreign entities and so on. Once you've submitted that form, there's an adjudication process. And based on the scope and degree of risk presented, security measures are recommended in order for the contractor to obtain an FCL. We found it helpful when working with clients through this process to propose mitigation measures affirmatively to DCSA when submitting an SF-328. If you know you've got a FOCI issue, it can only help to start thinking proactively as early as possible about what sort of mitigation DCSA is going to require, whether they be board resolutions or other more significant measures. Once those measures are proposed by DCSA, or there's a meeting of the minds as to what's going to be required to mitigate the FOCI, the contractor is then responsible for mitigating those measures. Of course, there is a review and an ongoing audit by DCSA to ensure that the contractor is complying with those measures. And there are, I believe, in every agreement I've seen mitigating FOCI, an obligation for the contractor to immediately contact DCSA if there are any changes to board makeup or any of the other terms in the or any other changes that could impact the terms of those mitigation measures. But when is a U.S. entity said to be under FOCI? Well, the government will consider a U.S. entity to be under FOCI when a foreign interest has the power to direct or decide issues affecting the entity's management or operations in a manner that could either result in unauthorized access to classified information or adversely affect performance under a classified contract or agreement. For example, if a foreign entity owns 40% of a company and is able, based on that ownership, to appoint 2 board members, if those board members are privy to classified information or have access to classified information, that could present a significant problem. A foreign government is currently FOCI will also be considered to be in place if a foreign government is currently exercising or could prospectively exercise that power, whether directly or indirectly, such as through the ownership of U.S. entities' securities, by contractual arrangements or other means, or by the ability to control or influence the election or appointment of one or more members of the entity's governing board. And for those of you who aren't familiar with an SF 328, we wanted to give you just a brief overview of what that form entails. This is a form you can pull up with a quick Google search if you want to look at it in more detail. But it's a 10-question survey designed to help the government identify the president of FOCI. Each question asks for a yes or no answer, and all affirmative answers have to be supplemented with additional documentation. Questions include things like whether any foreign entity owns more than 5% of a domestic company's stock or has provided more than a 5% capital commitment, whether the key management personnel in the organization are U.S. citizens, and key management personnel typically are a senior management official like the CEO, the prospective facility security officer. The FSO is the person at your company responsible for complying with the NISPOM regulation requirements. Executive committee board members or executive committee members are considered to be key management personnel, and board members are considered to be key management personnel in most circumstances. Another question is whether a foreign entity has the ability to influence the appointment of key decision makers, whether contracts or agreements exist with foreign persons, the extent of indebtedness of the organization to foreign entities, and that may include foreign-owned banks, and more. And again, if you are completing an SF 328, it is important that the answers be thorough and you provide as much detail as you can to help DCSA evaluate the FOCI issue. The more information you provide up front, the quicker this process is going to go, and you can avoid a lot of back and forth with the government on requests for additional detail. And Adam, I'll let you cover the next topic for us.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, so let's now review some key terms related to FOCI to kind of better understand the meanings behind this critical piece to working on classified contracting efforts or receiving an FCL. So FOCI is, as Richard reviewed, is primarily concerned with influence by what are called foreign countries of concern. And those foreign countries of concern include China, North Korea, Russia, Iran, and other countries deemed to be one by the Secretary of State. And foreign persons are defined as foreign nationals, foreign governments, foreign entities, or any entity over which control is exercised or exercisable by a foreign national, foreign government, or foreign entity. Next slide, please. As for the O in FOCI, ownership means a beneficial ownership of the business, which in simple terms means a person who has or shares voting power or investment power, even though majority ownership may be in another person's name. Next slide, please. So next, looking at the C, or control, in FOCI stands for control, and here the primary focuses are: one, covered individuals who are designated by the federal research agency concerned as someone who contributes in a meaningful way to a scientific development or execution of a research and development project; or two, key management personnel, which we reviewed a little earlier, and are designated as key decision makers at the company, who are required to simultaneously with an FCL application process, they must be processed individually for personnel security clearances. And important to note here is that non-US citizens are not eligible to be key management personnel. Next slide, please, Richard. So now for I, stands for influence in FOCI, and this is the largest risk area for a company that submits an SF-38, because it's the hardest to assess or measure objectively. Generally speaking, foreign influence is described as a company's dependence on a foreign entity for revenue, funding, debt, supply, infrastructure, or other non-ownership based economic relationships, which directly impact the company's decision making. And then listed on the slide here are some examples of foreign influence, any of which of these could pose a red flag for DCSA in its review of a company's SF-328. And those kind of include, among other things, the ability to direct or decide matters affecting the management or operation of the company, debt liabilities, contracts and understandings between the company and foreign persons or entities, materials, hardware supply chains that are supplied by a foreign government, also foreign governments connected to customers or customers based in foreign countries, and also research collaborations with foreign government a foreign government connected entity. Next slide, please, Richard. So if DCSA determines that a company is under FOCI or has a FOCI concern, DCSA will determine the extent and manner to which the FOCI may result in unauthorized access to classified information, and the types of actions, if any, that would be necessary to mitigate the associated risks to a level deemed acceptable to DCSA. So these listed factors, which are also readily available on the DCSA website, are reviewed in the aggregate in connection with a foreign interest that is the source of FOCI concern. Also the country or countries in which the foreign interest is domiciled and has a principal place of business, and any other foreign country that is identified by DCSA because it's a substantial source of revenue or otherwise has significant ties to the foreign interest, which was identified as connected to the the contractor that was applying or submitted the SF-328. And so some of these factors, as you see listed here, if that foreign interest or that foreign country that has kind of a control or influence over the contractor has a record of economic espionage against US targets, enforcement actions or engagement in unauthorized technology transfers, types and sensitivity of information that shall be accessed, the source, nature, and extent of FOCI, and record or a bad record of compliance with pertinent US laws, regulations, and contracts, etc. And now I'll send it back to Richard to close up the presentation.
Thank you very much, Adam. So I think one thing that's important to keep in mind as we discuss FOCI is that our economy, like many around the world, or most around the world, allows investment by people irrespective of their nationality, with some exceptions for countries that we have placed sanctions on. and capital has been flowing freely across our border and others around the world for decades. So a number of the most sophisticated companies doing some of the most advanced work in R&D are owned, at least in part, by foreign entities. And so I think we've seen an increase in activity in the FOCI space over the past decade, and I think this will continue, because coupled with that free flow of capital have been increased concerns about foreign espionage and cyber activity by countries that may not wish us the best. So, yet another reason why it's important for you to understand it, because even if your company isn't going to be seeking a facility clearance, having some understanding of the government's perspective of these issues, I think will help in your government contracts work. FOCI mitigation differs depending on whether the FOCI is related to or unrelated to ownership by a foreign entity. For FOCI factors that are present that are unrelated to ownership, the government will look at mitigation measures that could assure the foreign interest can be effectively mitigated to ensure performance under the classified contract is not impaired. I think there's less concern about leakage of foreign information and more, again, about impairment of performance. Some measures might include modification or termination of loan agreements, contracts, and other understandings with foreign interests, diversification or reduction of foreign source income, and demonstration of financial viability independent of foreign interests, elimination or resolution of debt problems, assignment of specific oversight duties and responsibilities to board members, a physical or organizational separation of the contractor component performing classified contracts, adoption of special board resolutions, something we'll discuss in the measures related to ownership as well, and other actions that can negate or mitigate foreign control or influence. I think if your company is heavily dependent on income and government contracts from Namibia, and the termination of those contracts or the suspension of those contracts could result in your company going bankrupt, the government will have some concern about your ability to perform classified work without being influenced or leveraged by that foreign entity, for example. Now, mitigation options related to ownership are a little bit more formalized than the measures that we just talked about, reducing your dependence on foreign contracts, or moving loans from a foreign bank to a U.S. bank, and so on. Here, the government will determine if mitigation measures could assure the foreign interest can be effectively mitigated to ensure performance is not impaired and information isn't shared. And so we've listed the main 5 measures here, and they are listed from least onerous to most onerous. But we'll start with a board resolution. These are typically used where a foreign entity does not own voting interests sufficient to elect a representative of the company's governing board. And they are just what they sound like. It's just a legally binding acknowledgement passed by the company's board of directors that acknowledges, foreign investors, excludes them from access to classified or export controlled information, and states that they will have no involvement in classified programs. These resolutions might also formally acknowledge any debts the company owes to a foreign entity, and ensures that a foreign shareholder does not sit on the board and does not have a right to appoint a member of the board. These are, again, the least onerous, and we see these quite frequently. Sometimes board resolutions can have additional features, appointing certain individuals to positions at the company, or prohibiting a board member who may be a foreign citizen from involvement or discussion of any classified work. But but that's the general overview of board resolutions. The next step, if the FOCI concerns are more significant, is called the security control arrangements. These are used when a company is not effectively owned or controlled by a foreign entity, but when the foreign interest is entitled to representation on the company's governing board. These arrangements preserve a foreign owner's voice in the business management of the company, while also denying the foreigner unauthorized access to classified or export-controlled information. If the foreign shareholder sits on the board of directors or has the right to appoint a representative, a security control arrangement, along with at least one outside director, is usually sufficient to mitigate the FOCI concern. Now, I'm not sure how many of those are familiar with the term outside director or inside director. But inside director is a director appointed by the shareholder, the foreign shareholder, and an outside director is a director independent of the company and the shareholder and approved by DCSA, who has clearance and is there in part to ensure compliance with the SCA terms and the SCA agreement. The next step, as you sort of ratchet up the seriousness of mitigation measures, is the special security agreement. These are used when a cleared company is effectively owned or controlled by a foreign entity with majority interest, and it denies the foreign owner unauthorized access to classified and export-controlled information while trying to preserve their voice to a degree in the business management of the company outside of the classified work. If the foreign owner has the right to appoint a representative, then an SSA, along with typically 3 outside directors, is usually considered sufficient to mitigate the FOCI concern. In some cases, there's something called a national interest determination that may be required. That's a determination by the government that certain types of classified information can be provided to the contractor, notwithstanding the FOCI concern. Even the mitigation measures in an SSA may be insufficient to give the government comfort that that particularly sensitive information is going to be sufficiently protected. Next, along the line of more serious restrictions and mitigation measures is a proxy agreement. A proxy agreement is used when a cleared company is effectively owned or controlled by a foreign entity. And under these arrangements, the foreign owner relinquishes most rights associated with the ownership of the company by conveying his or her voting rights, or the foreign owner's voting rights, to proxy holders, who must be cleared U.S. citizens approved by the U.S. government. If you own in other words, if you own a company, you're a foreigner that owns a company in the U.S., and DCSA has said it's got to be under a proxy agreement, you will not have the right to make decisions about investments, pursuit of certain contracts. You will have limited visibility into the company's work while still owning the company. There are certain situations where proxy holders have to obtain approval from a foreign owner before taking action, and those matters include things like sale or disposal of the company's assets, mergers, consolidations, or reorganization, or filing of a bankruptcy petition. But on most other decisions, the foreign owner is not going to have a say and is not permitted to participate in those decisions. And then even beyond a proxy agreement is something called a voting trust, and that is just what it sounds like. You hear where cleared companies effectively owned or controlled by a foreign entity, the foreign owner transfers legal title for the company to a cleared U.S. citizen or the voting trustees, who have to be approved by the U.S. government. This is a situation, these are used in a situation where the company has to be financially independent from the foreign owner. Now, I should mention one other feature of these mitigation measures is something called the Government Security Committee. Those are required for security control agreements, special security agreements, proxy agreements, and voting trusts. The Government Security Committee is a permanent subcommittee of a cleared company's board of directors, and that Government Security Committee is made up of outside directors, proxy holders, voting trustees, or any directors who hold personnel security clearances, depending on the type of mitigation agreement that's in place. As part of the FOCI mitigation requirements, this committee, the subcommittee, plays a key role in the management of the company under FOCI and ensuring compliance with the provisions and security measures of the FOCI agreements. Again, these GSC members have to be resident U.S. citizens with no prior involvement, typically with the company, its affiliates, or any foreign owners. And they act, at least in part, on behalf of the U.S. government. And they can be nominated by the parent company and approved by DCSA. But as you can see, some of these measures get to be pretty significant in terms of restricting an owner's ability to understand what a company is doing. For example, if a company owned by a foreign government needs to invest $100 million to perform a classified contract for the United States government to manufacture advanced howitzers, that may be challenging for the owner of the company to not have a right to influence the decision of the company to take on the debt to manufacture that facility to perform the classified work. So you can see how owners, there's some tension between ownership rights and the needs of our national industrial security program to protect sensitive information. And while these five measures have, five types of mitigation measures have pretty clear definitions, the mitigation measures DCSA is going to require can be fairly nuanced. So you may have a special security agreement that has more onerous features in one case than in another. And give me just one moment. So here, our final slide, we're just going to cover some ways to mitigate FOCI risks, and that depends on the nature of the risk, of course. One of the measures is to require covered individuals to complete insider risk awareness training. Under the NISPOM, that's something that's required every year, and insider risk awareness training includes information about foreign adversaries and how they may seek to obtain information about businesses performing classified work. Replace individuals determined to be FOCI risks in contract proposals and grants. Oh, sorry. I apologize. Here, we just get back to the correct slide. Sorry about that. Again, review contracts to clarify relationships and affiliations considered risky due to FOCI. Require covered individuals resign or cease their foreign affiliations that are deemed problematic. Remove problematic foreign board members or transfer their voting rights. Reduce percentage of foreign investment or ownership. Limit foreign supply chain dependence. Reduce foreign debt and other foreign financial obligations. Or cease joint ventures or subsidiaries with affiliations with foreign countries of concern. I worked with a company recently that had a foreign board member who was born in China and was a citizen of a third country. And the board member had significant technical expertise that was very, very relevant to what the company was doing. So they couldn't remove the individual, but what they could do is that they could, by board resolution, exclude that individual from any discussions or access to any information about classified work the company was performing. So some other best practices, take time to completely understand your organization and business goals, conduct a risk assessment to identify the potential risk areas and take actions that would mitigate those risks. Whether that's through transaction documents, side letters, or structural decisions, starting early will pay dividends as your company grows. Incorporate language into transaction documents that ensures the passivity of the foreign investment or memorializes the absence of certain rights that would trigger U.S. government scrutiny. For example, if you've got foreign investors, to the extent possible, they should be limited partners if you're a government contractor, and voting rights should be restricted to the maximum extent possible. Of course, for foreign entities seeking to make large investments in companies, telling them that they need to have their voting rights restricted can be a difficult conversation. be consistently vigilant. Finally, be consistently vigilant as to who comes onto your capitalization table. Ask yourself, will the amount of foreign ownership result in foreign influence? And as I know most of the attendees at the webinar today are small businesses, but as your business is growing, now is the right time to think about some of these issues. Again, if you think there's a possibility that in later stages you may be doing some classified work or competing for potentially classified work. And with that, we can turn to any questions we have from the audience.
Thank you, Richard and Adam. That was great. It's the first time we've had this webinar, so very interesting to learn about it. And no, it doesn't seem like we have any questions. I don't see any in the chat box. Now's your chance to type out any questions if you have them for the speakers, or if you want them to reiterate anything that was mentioned earlier in the presentation. And while we wait for that, I'd just like to remind everybody that you can also speak to your Apex Accelerator counselor about FOCI and other related issues. So please don't hesitate to reach out to them to request an appointment. And also, I'm going to post a link in the chat box with a link to basically our training calendar through to June of this year. So I'm always scheduling new classes and outreach events. So please do, keep abreast of what we're offering. All right, Richard and Adam, doesn't look like we have any questions. So I'd just like to thank you both for doing this presentation and breaking it down for us in digestible chunks. Appreciate it. And I will be sending out the slides and the recording shortly. So if you would like to follow up with Richard or Adam, you can do so. And I'd like to thank you all again for attending today. We do appreciate your participation. All right, well, thank you and stay safe, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, Yasmin.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody. Take care.